Filmmakers are among the most brilliant minds of creatives, and there is no debating that Alfred Hitchcock is one of the best. Hi, I'm Michelle Hickey, Director of Film and Paper Club. In this video, I'm joined by my creative partner, Steve King, for an in-depth conversation about Hitchcock's extensive film catalog and all the ways that he inspires us to be better storytellers. Do you remember the first Hitchcock movie you ever watched?
I do. The first Hitchcock movie I ever watched was with my dad. It was in the summer. We were home from school. I think it was probably somewhere, I was probably somewhere around the age of like 12, maybe 13, 12, 11, somewhere in that ballpark. And we had watched it in our basement. We watched Dial M for Murder. And I always thought it was the coolest thing ever, like just to like it was just me and my dad. We were just, he wanted to show me the movie. He liked the movie, and I was hooked. What was your first Hitch movie?
My first Hitchcock movie was Vertigo, and I watched it in my freshman year of college in my color theory class. But I also remember when I got my paperback, there was a lot of I got a lot of stuff wrong because it was a color theory class. A lot of it was, noticing what color costumes they wear at certain points of the movie, which characters wear which colors. Of course, like the scene at the end where you're kind of seeing the colors flashing on Jimmy Stewart's face.
Yep.
And I don't remember specifically what I got wrong, but I do remember feeling like I really learned something just in reading my professor's comments and thinking, oh, okay, now I get it. I didn't get it on my own. I needed him to explain it to me. But I think that was one of the first examples of me watching a movie through the lens of being analytical about it and realizing that within each movie, and now, in TV, in books, knowing how many layers there are and how much thought goes into creating them. Because I don't know about you, but I kind of grew up with the message that, watching TV is you're lazy and it's associated with being a couch potato.
Yeah, Hitchcock was just, he's one of those filmmakers that, or directors that I fell in love with immediately. And I don't even know if I knew why. But what I find as I'm getting older is you go beyond wanting to see another movie because it's a Hitchcock movie and you want to experience it. And now you find yourself sort of pouring into, the plot, the writing, the angle. There's a great film that he did called Rope, which I could make a real argument is my favorite Hitchcock movie, where there's a scene where he shoots without edit points. I don't know how long it is. It's minutes. It's minutes long, and you probably know the scene, but done intentionally to keep you on the edge of your seat where there isn't that natural point for you to blink when there's the edit point. And that's the stuff that I find myself as an adult now, all these years after watching that movie for the first time, getting sucked into, is the elements that make up the picture that I fell in love with at an earlier age.
I think it is, I don't know how long the longest stretch is, but I think that there's something I don't know how many cuts are in a typical movie, but in Rope, I think there's 6 or 8 cuts total, in the whole.
The whole thing takes place in that apartment, right? So you really don't have the time to do that. You're not going from a scene on the street to a scene in the apartment to a scene in a bank. It's all done in one shot. So it allows you to kind of be confined to that area.
It's funny that I think that of his movies, while I'm certainly drawn to, you know, his more like adventure stories like North by Northwest, To Catch a Thief, those are like very high up on my list and are very like visually beautiful. I am probably, if I had to rank them, I am more drawn towards those kind of like quieter, more contained stories like Rope and Dial M for Murder. Also, it reads more like a play. Like it's really only in this shot in this one apartment. And same with Rear Window. I mean that
Yeah.
famously, like the whole thing just takes place on that one soundstage, on that one
Yeah.
set, and there's something that's really backwards but like cool and fascinating in that when you contain yourself, that gives you more creativity. It forces you to be more creative. And I love that example that you gave about Rope, because I don't think that Hitchcock was like, oh, you know what would be really cool is if we didn't cut. He didn't want to cut because it added to the tension of it. And when we think about creating art, our initial thought is like, oh, we have to do something that's like really fancy and something that's like really over the top to like, you know, try to impress people or to like do something different. Like he is such a master of doing things differently, but doing it more simplistically, and therefore, in my opinion, is much more successful.
He's got a line that I have fallen in love with over the years that I heard in an interview that he did a number of years ago, now decades ago, where he talked about how, I'm going to paraphrase this, but he doesn't like to show reality for what it is.
What is reality? I don't think many people want reality. I think whether it's in the theatre or in films, I think it must look real, but it never must be. Because reality is something none of us can really stand at any time.
That's a big component of almost every one of his films. You know, even if you look at Psycho and the shower scene, it's graphic, but compared to more modern day, you know, horror or suspense films, it pales in comparison in terms of the graphic nature of it because of the artful way that it was shot. You feel it, but you never really see it. And I think that's an element with his movies that, you know, there are filmmakers, I think, who are similar in terms of how they approach it, but it's unmatched in the actual end result. His work has that ability to make you feel like what you're seeing could happen, is happening, but it never actually is what reality completely is.
And the cool thing about that is that he, in doing that, really invites the audience to be part of his experience. Something that our longtime listeners are probably so sick of hearing us say this over and over again, but respect your audience, trust your audience. And Hitchcock does such a good job with that. But if you think about logos or even a piece of artwork, if you could imagine like an ice cream cone where you only see, if it's in black and white, you only see half of it. But what happens is our brains are smart enough to know, if you're only seeing half of the ice cream cone, what the other half looks like. So you'll see this, the reason I brought up like logos is like, you'll often see this application in it. People who create logos will create things that look like that because it looks more interesting, and they trust that, you know, your eye knows to fill in that gap. And the same thing is happening, you know, I'm sure in other movies too, but definitely in Hitchcock movies. Going back to the shower scene, we're never seeing the knife hit her body, but your brain and your eyes know that that's happening, and we're filling in those gaps ourselves. And it just makes for such a better, engaging experience for us as viewers.
Yeah, and in many ways it makes it more terrifying or worse, because I mean, what's more terrifying than what you allowed to happen in your imagination
Yes.
than what actually plays out on scene. I think there's elements to his filmmaking that, you know, if you're not conscious of it, and this is not a put down to people who aren't, but if you're not conscious of it coming, it's probably the best way to experience it, because you don't see it happening. Like, he has this propensity to make the audience aware of something that's going to happen before the main character finds out that it's going to happen. And it's, as again, having seen the majority of his career works, I now sometimes watch the films to find that point more so than to watch the movie again for the 30th time. And I think a great example of this is Rope. I mean, the audience finds out almost immediately that these two guys killed a guy, and that guy's in a trunk in the middle of this room where they're going to have a party in about 10 minutes with a dozen or so guests. And the guests, including the lead character and Jimmy Stewart, has no idea that there's a body in there. And you want to talk about holding someone's attention for the full length of that movie. I mean, that's the way to do it. Psycho's the same way. You know that there's multiple elements of that happening. You know that Norman Bates, dressed as his mother, is in the shower, is in the bathroom. I mean, you don't know that it's Norman Bates at the time, but you know the mother's in the shower or coming into the bathroom before the main character knows that it's happening. So even that very short amount of time also gets that suspense feeling kind of like pent up in you. So it's a brilliant way of making making films, and I think it does more again to add to the anxiety of the watcher of the movie. I think he had a propensity to pick the same, or to cast the same type of actress in his movies. You know, the majority of the ones in his hits, at the very least, were all, you know, young, attractive, blonde women. And I think that was his style, or I shouldn't say style, like that was he desired that. And I think, you know, a lot of what he put into his movies were things that he probably, as an individual, wasn't getting. So I think you see a lot of romance in certain parts with the male lead, flirtatiousness or whatever it is. And I think those are all things that, you know, he likely desired in his life that he just wasn't able to, you know, obtain. So he created it as an art and incorporated it in part of his films.
I learned something recently that I didn't know before. You probably know this because I feel like you listen, like you're famous between us anyway.
In this conversation, yes, right.
For watching old interviews on YouTube, like from the 60s and 70s.
Totally.
So I heard this, I believe, in an interview with Alfred Hitchcock and Peter Bogdanovich in that TMC podcast that I just listened to, which I will link to in the show notes because it's like my favorite thing that I've listened to in the last year. But anyway, in that interview, Hitchcock was talking about when he was very young.
I suppose I must have been at the age of 5 when I was sent along with a note to the chief of police, who read the note, then promptly put me into a cell and locked the door.
And you hadn't read the note?
5 minutes. No, I hadn't read the note. And
for 5 minutes?
Yes, and then said, that's what we do to naughty little boys, you see.
And that is something that like stayed with him and really impacted him. So we can see this theme in so many of his movies about like his relationship with police and the law. And immediately the visual that jumped to mind is in Psycho when she's in the car and the police officer kind of like fills the whole frame, like looking into the car.
Yeah, it's terrifying. It
Yeah.
does actually like make your hair stand up.
Yeah.
And he does a really good job in when the officer is following her car, after he kind of checks on her, when he reappears when she's making the transaction to change cars at the car lot. The watching from a distance, always has an eye on her. It has this very haunting feel to it. But I think there's something about things that happen to us in our childhood, and again, this is a whole psychological conversation, but moments in our childhood that we remember that still, I think, stay with us as we become adults, even though we've knowingly disproved that none of that stuff is ever going to happen or come to fruition. You still have those apprehensive feelings towards, something that your parents told you, probably to try to keep you away from something, and that's always embedded in the back of your head, or an experience that you had. I think those are all things that still are with us as we get older, and I think Hitchcock did a really good job of trying to incorporate some of those primal fears and remind us of some of those on probably a larger scale, that these things can still happen, even though they're not likely to. You couple that with the way something is shot, it can really do a lot of damage in the moment when you're watching it. What's the one where there's where the son is missing?
The Man Who Knew Too Much.
There's a scene in that movie where he and who was the female lead?
It's Doris Day, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Where they were there. Yeah, right, because she does Que Sera,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Where they're looking for him, and they're in like an area of this town where it's like the two of them in the middle of the day. It feels like it's like 2 p.m, 3 p.m. Nobody's on the street, like, and like they're plotting like how they're going to go about this thing. And you're just like, it seems so empty right now. Like, it seems so like, where's the hustle and bustle? But it just lends itself to the feeling of being alone, where I imagine if there were a kidnapping, that like that's how you feel in the moment. So like,
yeah.
Like I love the combination of how should somebody be feeling in this moment when this is happening, and then let's bring that to life. Let's make that a real thing. There isn't, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say I love everything that he's done, but there's elements of each of his films, if not more so in individual films, that are wonders. And yet somehow I feel like he's underrated.
Oh, definitely. Well, especially as time goes on, I think. I mean, how many parents are introducing their kids to Hitchcock movies?
Yeah, it's true. And I don't think my dad would I would not call my dad a Hitchcock fan. I just think it was like he liked that movie. You're gonna like this one, so that's what we would watch. But I think he's underrated. Maybe not so much today because of it's like a movie that was a box office disaster and then somehow found a cult following and became this big thing after the fact. I think in many ways he has become a better film known as a more appreciated filmmaker than he was while he was doing this.
I think so too. I do think that his legacy is stronger than the respect he received at the time, but I think that's unfortunately many artists, not just him.
Yeah, I think that's true.
If anyone's watching this or listening to this and they've never seen a Hitchcock before, what 3 to 5 movies would you recommend starting with?
I think you have to see. I think you have to probably do Psycho as your kickoff, because that's his. It's
like a signature.
Yeah. I don't know if he would call it that, but I think as film watchers and film, movie watchers go, I think they would probably say that. If it were me, I would probably say Psycho, North by Northwest, Rear Window.
Mm-hmm. I
If
think that's
if I
solid.
had to give you three to pick, I think those would be the three. If you want to get a good feel for,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't even really get into a lot of North by Northwest, in terms of, and there's still time, but we really didn't get into that as an example. But I think the storytelling in that film, the dialogue, the reliance on dialogue, in that film, Psycho 2, I think there's a lot on that, but the reliance on dialogue between Cary Grant and Ava Marie Saint, I think is like probably one of my favorite lead actor actress pairings of any one of his movies.
Mm-hmm. I think that it is probably his best well-rounded film. It has everything. It has the mystery, the suspense, the love story. It's funny. It's beautiful. And yeah, Cary Grant, I mean, you just...
Well, and the elements
you can't go
of humor,
wrong.
Yeah, and the elements of humor, like, if you haven't seen it, I don't want to ruin it, but there's moments you'll see throughout the film where, like, the way he delivers a line or his playfulness or his just complete, like, lack of seriousness for the situation that
Yes,
he's in.
love that.
Yeah, is
that humor is
priceless.
the best. Yeah.
I mean, North by Northwest to me is, it's a thriller and there's a little bit of a mystery component to it. I might say it's probably more mystery than thriller, but there's a lot of like comedy,
Mm-hmm.
I think, in his that are little comedy balls that are just dropped in from time to time in his films that, like, it's like a pressure valve where it alleviates a little bit of like the tenseness and then gets you set up for the next punch that's about to come.
I love the line where his mother is in the elevator and she asks them, like, "You're not trying to kill my son, are you?" And like she's like
They all
asking them
laugh
like seriously.
Yeah.
You gentlemen aren't really trying to kill my son, are you?
Yeah, and
Like,
everyone's
oh, are you
laughing and
really trying to
chuckling,
kill him? I kind of feel like Rope and Dial M for Murder are kind of hidden gems. They're like slightly off the beaten path. Are there any others that you think that most people have never heard of that you would recommend?
Rebecca?
I just watched Rebecca this summer for the first time. It was so good.
What was your thoughts?
I loved it. I really liked it. You seem like you're not as enthused.
No, I like it. The intimidation, I think, components of it all is, from the, was it Laurence Olivier, his wife, his first wife.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also one of those, like, it's not my favorite movie by him, but like, I think it's one of those, again, childhood, early adulthood. You still have some elements of it where you don't want to necessarily, like, your guard is up for being intimidated as an adult versus like when you were a kid, you kind of feared that piece of it. I think it does prey on a lot of that early childhood component. I think that would be one that's not necessarily like one of his hallmark films that I think is good. Strangers on a Train, I think that's pretty well known too. But I don't think it gets the same level of play as the North by Northwest or Vertigo or The Birds. So,
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
It's funny that you pick two that are black and white. The one that I would suggest as like, it feels Hitchcock, but it doesn't, is called The Trouble with Harry. And I think it's one of his more funny, like it may even be labeled as a comedy. Like there is a murder in it. There is a, kind of like whodunit type story, but it's a really interesting visual film. I own the DVD, and this is like a DVD from the 2000s. And every time I play it, I am like floored by how like a high quality viewing experience it is. So I don't know if they like just really remastered it or whatever, but you would almost think it was like shot now. Like that's how crisp it is. It is also very colorful, very saturated. It takes place in the fall. So there's like in New England. So there's like lots of foliage and, it's like, one of these stories about like a town and all the characters are like a little bit wacky. And I think it's kind of like a fun, not so scary Hitchcock movie.
Even, 70 years after some of these things were made, it still feels like it could have been produced in, 2021. One of the interviews that he gave later in his life, he was asked about what he thinks the future of cinema going is going to be, or what he would like it to be. And he gave a really interesting answer.
I see the possibility maybe in the year 3000 or something that people go to be entertained, if entertainment is still needed then, and they go into a big darkened auditorium and they are mass hypnotized, and instead of identifying themselves with somebody on the screen, they are that person. And when they buy their ticket, they choose which character they want to be. And under hypnotism, mass hypnotism, they go through the story, and it's injected into them by some kind of telepathy, and they suffer the agonies and so forth, or enjoy the romance with a woman or something. And then the lights go up and it's all over.
Thanks so much for joining me and Steve for this conversation. If you're looking for more content from us, please check out our shows, A Podcast for Creatives, wherever you love listening to podcasts, and Commercial Breakdown here on YouTube. Before you go, if you loved this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Inside our membership site, you'll gain access to live events, plus bonus content including weekly guides, food and drink pairings, and creative prompts. Best of all, you'll have the opportunity to discuss your favorite films, television, and books with our community members. Until next time.